Hello and welcome back. It is Monday. I am Mr. Sesotris, and this week I wanted to talk about books that were so good that I want to reread them. Now this is going to be a mix of all kinds of books. These are books that I want to reread for various reasons, and I think we should reread books. This idea that you can get everything out of a book in the first go through is, I don't know, it's a little consumerist, and I don't know, I feel like there's some books where you're in a different place when you read it, and so when you reread it again at a later point in your life, you get different things out of it. There's some books that we read when we were young that seem very different when you reapproach them as an adult. I don't know, I just feel like there's books that we should be rereading, and there shouldn't always be this push to like constantly only read new books, only read them once, and then they go on your shelf and you never touch them again, kind of thing. So these are books that I have read and I enjoyed, or I understood that I could enjoy them at a later point in life. And so these are books that I want to reevaluate or just reread because I really liked them. There's lots of different reasons. So let's just get into the list. First on the list is The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. This was sort of the book that got me into like fantasy. Before this, I had read some fantasy stuff like Lord of the Rings and Earthsea and all that stuff. But I really wasn't like a fantasy person. I was much more into sci-fi. That was kind of the stuff that I had read. And this was sort of the book. I also read this kind of at the beginning of when I got into kind of the online bookish world. This is sort of when I first created my TikTok account and started doing book reviews. This was sort of, you know, the first book that I was influenced to buy by kind of that bunch. And I don't know, I read it and I really enjoyed it at the time, but it's one of these books I don't remember a lot from it. It's not a book that's stuck in my memory very well, and so I really want to reread it. I do have the prequel that she released, A Day of Fallen Night, and I really like her writing style, I remember, but it's been like a few years. I don't think I'm going to get to rereading this for a bit, but eventually. Oh, there's a cat here now. I do want to reread it, and I want to kind of get to it with fresh eyes, because I've read a lot of other fantasy since, a lot of like contemporary fantasy, and so I feel like I want to kind of get a second opinion of it and see like, do I actually like this, or did I like it because it was sort of something new at the time? So this is definitely one that I want to revisit before reading the prequel. All right, and this is one that I haven't read for a long time, and that is Michael Crichton's Timeline. And that's kind of an odd one to go in this list here. But I've reread a bunch of Michael Crichton's stuff many times. I've read Jurassic Park like a zillion times. I've read Sphere multiple times. I'm trying to think of some of the other ones. Congo, I think I've read twice. Rising Sun, I've read a couple times. But I feel like Timeline is the one that I only read once, but I remember really enjoying it. And I don't know if it's one of those things where it's like, I read it once and it like stuck in my head so well, because I can remember kind of a lot of it, and the kind of over concept. This is the one where it's like, normal people from the present day time travel back to medieval times and get caught up in all the stuff going on then. I remember I really enjoyed it, but it's not one that I've ever reread, and that kind of is a little baffling. So I want to reread this one for sure and give it another go, because I remember I really liked it. Now this one I'm rereading because the third book in the series just came out, and so I need to reread them to get back into the world so I can read the third one, and that is Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. The third book, Mirrored Heavens, just came out, and I'm really excited to read that one. This is one where I love the world building, I love the characters, but it is a little complex. There's a lot going on, and there's lots of long, complicated character arcs. And so I definitely want to reread this one before I read all three books at once, just to kind of get the full story, because I know there's details in here that I have forgotten, but I'm really excited to finish the trilogy. I've heard good things about the third book. It's gotten great reviews, so I definitely want to give this whole trilogy kind of the full attention, one right after another, whole trilogy all at once, because I think it needs to be. Now, next up, this is another kind of really different one, and that is Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. This is one of my favorite classics, and I've read it twice, but the first time I read it, I was in college early on, and I remember really liking the language and really getting caught up in the book, but I didn't really retain a lot of it. And so I read it again in grad school, kind of on my own, just to kind of, I was reading a lot of other stuff at the time, and I needed something just to read that I didn't have to write a report on or write a paper on or something. And so I read it then. But that was a chaotic time. My brain wasn't working anyways. And I remember just kind of drifting through it, and I appreciated the language. But this is definitely one that I want to reread now in kind of a calm place where I'm not in school. I don't need to write anything of it, but, you know, maybe do like a detailed review of the book, because I definitely think this is a wonderful, wonderful book, and it's a big favorite of mine because I love Virginia Woolf's writing. But it's definitely one that I think now is a good time. I'm in a good place in my life where I can reread this and get things out of it that I didn't get when I was a student. So definitely one that I want to revisit. And this next one's kind of similar to that one, and that is Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray. I read this the first time in, I think it was in grad school. I got to this one really late. And I read it in a modernism class, and I really enjoyed it, and I thought there was a lot of really complicated stuff. But again, it's something I read in a classroom setting, and it was, you know, we were studying it, taking it apart, looking at themes, looking at characters, and it was a little clinical. And so I want to read it again just to enjoy just kind of the gothic chaos of this book, because it's great. It's just, it's horror, but in a really interesting way that you don't see, where it's like the fantasy element is such a small part of it, and it just is kind of accepted. It's almost magic realism. It isn't, but it's got that same kind of thing. Like, there's no explanation given for why there's this magical painting that gives eternal life. It's just something that you just have to accept. And so this is definitely one that I want to reread now, where I can just get into kind of the messy chaos of the story and just enjoy the disasters that these characters are. This was a fantastic book, and I want to reread it in a outside the classroom setting to just enjoy it, because I think this is definitely one of those books that I really, really connected with, and I really, really enjoy Oscar Wilde's writing. So definitely want to revisit this one. Now, the next one is a trilogy, and that is Phillip Pullman's His Dark Materials trilogy. This is a, I don't know if it's YA or middle grade. It's kind of on the cusp between those two age ranges. But I do remember I read this pretty young. I think I was maybe junior high, maybe grade 5, that kind of area. And this book meant so much to me. I loved the characters, I loved the world, I loved the big complex religious themes. At the time, I didn't fully understand all of them, but at that time I was kind of I was asking big questions, and this book kind of, it didn't answer anything, but it did give me more questions to ask and more things to whatever. And my small brain was just, I didn't quite, I wasn't able to kind of intellectualize all the themes of this book, because it is pretty advanced in terms of what it's talking about, in terms of like religious oppression, concepts of the divine, and organized religion, and theocracy, and all that kind of stuff. So this is definitely one that I want to reread as an adult. I have not read it. I think the last time I read this, I was maybe 16 or 17, and I remember I've always loved it. But this is definitely one that I want to read through adult eyes and just revisit it and, pick out more of the depth in the themes, and also like the Paradise Lost references. This is definitely one that I do want to revisit, because I remember really liking this. And there is 2 other books. I think they're prequels, but it's called The Book of Dust. I don't know if there's a 3rd one, or if there's a 3rd one yet. I haven't heard much from Phillip Pullman about kind of where that series is going, but I do have the other 2 books, and I do want to kind of read this and then read those and just revisit it from an adult perspective, because I remember really, really enjoying the series. Now, another one, and this is one that I also read in school, and that is Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale. I have not read the sequel. I do have it. It's one that I picked up sometime shortly after it came out. But I definitely want to revisit this one as well. I think this is one where, for its time, it was very groundbreaking. But, oh, there's a loud cat here. Okay. For its time, it was very groundbreaking. But I feel like there's been more nuance added to the discussion of, like, women's rights and, you know, modern conceptions of what feminism is now versus when this was written. And I think there's just, the discussion in general has just gotten more complex and interesting. And so it's kind of interesting to reread this now and be able to find, you know, is there more nuance to be found in the themes, or is this something that maybe was important for its time, but there's other books now that, you know, deal with these topics in a better way? I don't know. This is just one that I definitely want to revisit. The class that I read this in, the instructor was great, but it was very much everything, I think pretty much everything we read in that class was all like white authors. And so the framing of this book was from a very kind of white feminism circa 1980s. And so I feel like, you know, any good book is going to remain relevant kind of regardless of the decade it's read in. So I definitely want to revisit this one again and just see, you know, what else is there, what depths can be found in this story that remain relevant today, because I think there's lots to be said about this book. And I love Margaret Atwood anyways, so definitely want to revisit this one. Now another one, and this is another one that I read in class, and that is The Piano by Jane Campion and Kate Pullinger. This is, it's a novelization of the film, but it was written kind of by the director of the film. And this was something I read as an undergrad, because it's short, and, you know, we read the book and then we watched the movie and talked about kind of the way that the book and the movie were different and how they portrayed certain things, especially the ending. The book and the movie have very different endings. The book's ending is kind of ambiguous, and the movie's ending is strange, because it's one of these ones where it's like you think you know what's happening, and then it really throws you for a loop. And it's really, really interesting. So I definitely want to reread this one, because I remember really enjoying the prose. The story is really cool, and I want to reread the book and then rewatch the movie as well, and just kind of revisit that, because I don't know, there was something in this one that really didn't, like, not spoke to me, but it was something that I really found compelling in terms of the character's voice and their story. And so this is definitely one that I want to give another go with. And it's short, so it should be an easy read. Another one that I want to read, and this is just one that I want to read because the book is delightful, and that is The Princess Bride by William Goldman. This is such a great book. I love the movie so much. It's definitely one of my favorites for sure. But the book is really, really interesting because it's a novel that begins before you think it begins. The whole thing about it being like, you know, a condensed version of S. Morgenstern's original book, all the stuff about like discussions with Stephen King about what elements should be cut from the book and what was important, all of that is part of the fiction. There's like an author's foreword where he's talking about his grandfather reading the story to him, which of course made it into the movie. And then there's stuff about like him reading it and having his kids read it and his wife, and all of that is part of the novel. But it's not, you don't think it is at first. You think it's just an author's foreword where he's just talking about his experiences with the book. But I don't know, it's just, it's a very clever, kind of cheeky sort of book. And the characters are great, and it's so quotable, and I definitely want to revisit this because there's a lot in it that I don't remember, and definitely want to revisit. Now the next one is a non-ish fiction, and that is The Woman Warrior by Maxine Hong Kingston. This is one that I read as an undergrad, and I really enjoyed it. It's kind of a blend of autobiography with fictional elements, but it's not fictional as in like not true. It's like it allows itself to be more artistic in the way that it portrays the reality of the world. And so things like ghosts exist, but it's because, you know, ghosts do exist in kind of the cultural framework of this child growing up. And so, you know, it's not something that's like, oh, this is a fictional thing that we added in. It's like, no, 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 this is what happened, but it allows itself to play with kind of the reality of the world through a child's eyes, and the fictional things that they attribute to the world that aren't necessarily not true, but are true in different ways. And I just remember really, really enjoying the narrative voice, the way it jumps around in time, the way it blends folklore with everyday life. There's a lot of really cool stuff in this one. And I haven't read this one for over a decade. And just see what else I can get out of this story, because I remember it being very lush and layered and compelling. So definitely want to read this one again. And then finally, I'm going back to a book that I loved as a child, but I sort of at one point just stopped reading it, and I definitely want to read it again. And that is The Call of the Wild by Jack London. Jack London is an interesting author. He's a naturalist, so his writing is very much like lone characters facing the elements, and there's nothing above them to help, and it's just them against the world kind of thing. And this edition also has White Fang in it, which I also read as a kid, but Call of the Wild was the one that really grabbed me. And it's told from the point of view of a dog. He's actually kind of like a, you know, like a half dog, half wolf, so wolf dog. And just his journey of just surviving in kind of the Alaskan wilderness. And there's people who come and go out of the story and everything, but it's just this dog just existing, and it's just kind of the rugged life out all by himself. And I don't know why that appealed to me. I was such a dramatic child. All of my favorite movies when I was a kid involved like sad orphans who were having to survive on their own because no one loved them. And it's like, okay, come on, like, you know, my family was fine. But this book, for some reason, I don't know why, but maybe it's just because the main character was a dog, and when you're like 10, you know, the coolest thing in the world would be just to be able to just run off into the woods and just live in the woods as a dog. I don't know. But Call of the Wild is one that I have not read for a million years. And I definitely want to revisit it because it was such an important book for me as a kid. And I'd love to read it as an adult and see, one, if it still holds up, and two, kind of what else was in there that I missed, because, you know, it's an interesting story. So Jack London, Call of the Wild, definitely want to revisit this one. Now, there's other books, of course, that I probably will reread at some point. And there's a lot of books that I've read recently that I will probably reread like way in the future because I did really love them. There's a lot of stuff. I've been reading a lot of stuff in the past couple of years, and so a lot of the books on my shelves are books that I've just recently read, and so I don't really want to reread them again just now. So this list of what I want to reread will probably be different in like 5 years. But these are books that, I don't know, they really spoke to me at an earlier point in my life, or I wasn't able to fully appreciate them, and I want to give them another go. So with that said, I will let you go. I will see you next week, and in the meantime, happy reading. Bye.